Let me welcome all of you to this event on India-Russia relations. I am actually quite surprised that there is such a large number of people who are interested in the subject. I thought it was a niche area which does not attract too much attention, but I guess we have to thank Mr. Trump for that also, that suddenly India-Russia has become extremely important. I have not much to say in this matter because we have an excellent panel. Would be difficult to assemble a better panel to discuss India-Russia relations. My only request to the panelists before I introduce them would be to, we are all aware of, India-Russia relations, time-tested and all that stuff. So let's leave all those past cliches out and let's look whether it will stand the test of time in future. We will kick off our discussions with Ambassador Ashok Mukherjee, who is a distinguished diplomat, has served in Moscow, several places in Central Asia, was our ambassador to Kazakhstan. He retired from the Foreign Service after a distinguished stint at the United Nations as a permanent representative of India. Next to him, we have Suhasini Haidar. I don't think anyone in this audience requires her to be introduced, but nevertheless, I have to do certain things. So Suhasini is with The Hindu. She is a journalist of many, many years. She's worked, actually, Suhasini is one of those journalists who has worked across all types of media, print, television, digital, what have you. And of course, if there are any other journalists here, I don't mean it to be offensive, but I guess Suhasini today is the best foreign policy coverage that you can get is from The Hindu, from Suhasini. And third, but not the least, we have our fifth column in Russia, Alexei Zakharov, who will give us a perspective, and hopefully we all begin to understand what the Russian perspective is on Indo-Russian relations. He is going to speak specifically about the economy. I have also been given a script that I'm supposed to stick to, so now onwards, no more extempore. I will stick to my script. Let me start with you, Ambassador Mukherjee. It's in the mix of what has happened, particularly in the last 3 months, where when the Americans sort of put tariffs and, in a sense, figurative speaking, if they sort of glared at us, did we tuck our tail, or are we capable of dealing with the pressures that have come on us? Is Russia still relevant to India in the long term? I mean, because, the US wants us to buy energy from them, they want us to buy arms from them, then there doesn't seem to be much else that we have Russia. Or is there some hidden depth in this?
Thank you, Nandan. I hope I'm audible to everybody. Thank you to Nandan and his colleagues at ORF for inviting me here today. The question that Nandan put to me is an interesting question for me because it reminds me that when we started the annual summit mechanism between India and Russia in the year 2000, when the summit took place between Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and President Putin, it was President Putin's idea. That is widely acknowledged. We did not realize at that time that this summit mechanism would actually continue for as long as it has. This is the 23rd summit in the last 25 years. And that, in a sense, answers one question, which is the investment of both our countries at the topmost leadership level to the continuation and expansion and relevance of the bilateral relationship. And that is due essentially to one element which is crucial in diplomacy, which I think is in the backdrop of the point that Nandan made about the last 3 months, and that is trust. It's only by dialogue and through dialogue and meetings that the element of trust develops at all levels of international interaction, and especially at the highest level. And I think that what has kept the relationship between India and Russia going for these last 25 years, on one side you have a head of state who has been present at all these summits, President Putin. And from our side, you have a prime minister who's attended the last 8 of these summits. There's a trust, a familiarity, and understanding of nuances between the two leaders, which has contributed to keeping the relationship going despite the turbulences that appear to have cropped up, especially in the last year or so. The point about the summit mechanism is that it's a structured mechanism. I was reminded of my participation in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th summits, 2002, 2003, 2004. Those were early days, but what we did at that time was to consciously create the structure for implementing the vision of the leaders, which is in the outcome document, through the 2 big commissions. One which is headed by the External Affairs Minister and the other one by the Defense Minister. So you have under that a lot of subgroups and structures, but they have in a sense provided the leaders with a regular opportunity through the summits of knowing what has happened with what they committed in the outcome document, and also on giving a direction to what should happen, course correction. And I think the summit mechanism, especially after 2018, when the 2 leaders agreed to include the informal summit mechanism at Sochi, that has played a role. And since the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine conflict, the very fact, and I read this in our Embassy of India Moscow website, that there have been as many as 22 phone calls between 2022 and today between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, speaks of the importance and the value of the element of trust, of picking up the phone, talking to each other, sorting out whatever issues have to be sorted out, or agreeing on something to the future. And finally, on the relevance, I think that since 1469, when Afanasi Nikitin came to India, the relevance of India-Russia relations is sui generis. It is not dependent on relations between India and other foreign countries. The India-Russia relationship stands on its own. Russia is a country that has never attacked India. India has never attacked Russia. We don't have a history of conflict. We don't even have a common border. So a shared border on land or in the maritime domain. That, in a sense, is a challenge, but also an opportunity. And I think that these are the reasons why I would say that the relationship continues to be relevant even today.
Thank you. Then can I just quickly follow up with a question? What you're suggesting is that, yes, there is a history, and there is that history that creates a certain momentum to take this forward. But does that also suggest that our worldviews are completely aligned?
In a broad sense, the worldviews, and it takes us back again to when we started with the summit mechanism. Many of you in the room may not remember it, but when we started in 2000, India was under sanctions because of our nuclear tests. We were, in a sense, cut off from the oxygen of the West, especially United States sanctions because of our nuclear tests. At that time, President Putin took this decision to introduce the summit mechanism. Now, when you fast forward it to today, not only is Russia under sanctions because of the Ukraine war, but India is also under sanctions because of the Ukraine war. So, in a sense, we are in the same boat. And I think that that is, in a very sort of metaphorical sense, a reply to what you asked me. That we have a common boat in which we are located, and the chart of this boat or the ship or whatever metaphor you choose to call the relationship is towards a common objective of multipolarity. It is not towards, and I had a talk once some years ago with my then counterpart in the Russian Foreign Office, and he explained to me a very nice nuance. He said that a lot of people, when they look at India-Russia relations, say that, they are not behaving like allies and they are not working like, close allies. But he said that these people don't understand that we are not allies as we were in 1971 when we had a treaty of alliance. Today, we are partners. And there's a difference between an alliance and a partnership. And I think that that's what I would like to say.
Thank you. Suhasini, if I may come to you now, a question that I was keeping in reserve for the ambassador, but let's start with you. What do you think? I mean, we are assembled here because President Putin is coming on the 4th, visiting India after a period. Last time was in 21, also in December, if I recall. What do you think will be the key outcomes of this visit?
Thank you. And when I heard that you were organizing a seminar on India-Russia, I said, oh my God, who's he going to invite? Because he is the expert that most would invite to something like this. Look, I think there is no question of the optics of the visit of President Putin to Delhi. They are already being watched very closely, not just in Delhi, Moscow, Washington, all of Europe is agog. Because we know that in January, there are many European leaders coming to India, and they would like to see what is the outcome from this visit. This is his first visit since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It is, in a sense, a marker at a time when, as Ambassador, or should I say Professor Mukherjee now, said of the fact that India too faces the possibility of sanctions. We don't know yet whether India will completely zero out its intake of Russian oil due to the American sanctions. But what we do know is that they have significantly reduced, and in December are likely to go to a third of what they were just 6 months ago. So we do anticipate that India has decided, as it did in 2017, 2018, and gave up Iranian oil, gave up Venezuelan oil, that Russian oil too may be a casualty of American bullying, of American ultimatums, if you like. So that, we don't yet know if that's going to be a complete giving up of Russian oil or at least a partial one. But it is an important time that he's coming because it reaffirms the partnership at a time. One of the key areas of engagement of the last few years is possibly shaky, shall we say. And President Putin himself referred to the impact of less intake of Russian oil by India and what it would mean for India's strategic autonomy. So I'm sure that all of us are watching very closely to see what happens in the next few days and what happens in the next few weeks. What we do expect from this visit is not just a reaffirmation of the visit, because these are two leaders who will not be meeting unless there is something important to announce. There have been many opportunities to have these meetings in these last 3 years. And, the fact that they've agreed on a date in the middle of what we understand is some peace proposal that President Putin could be needed in somewhere else to sign is important. I would think 3 big takeaways from this visit straight away. One is about defense. Russia is a traditional supplier of Indian hardware. We know that figure has decreased in the last decade. But what we also know is that this is the first visit after Operation Sindoor. And coming out of Operation Sindoor this year, a lot of the narrative has been about the Sukhois, the S-400s, the BrahMos. These are all products of the India-Russia collaboration. So the question about whether we are going to make some kind of an announcement or not, this will be in the discussions. The second, I think, is, especially since the Prime Minister himself went on air a few days ago to talk about nuclear power. Now, the fact is, despite having signed civil nuclear arrangements with a whole load of countries, in the US-India civil nuclear deal was done in the 2000s. In 2015, they announced it was finally done, but yet Russia is today the only foreign operator of nuclear power plants in India. And there's no question that that will increase as well. So that's another place we're looking in specific. I think the third has to be trade. And I mean, I'm sure you can tell me further back, but since I've been a journalist for 30 years, India-Russia trade was never above or below the $5 to $15 billion band. If it has increased to $65 billion in the last few years, it has been about oil. If oil is about to go, is India and Russia ready to accept a lower ambition for trade? I don't think so. And going by Prime Minister Modi's visit to Moscow last year, where I had traveled to cover it, I think there is no question that both countries are finding new places where they can do trade together, particularly in Russia's Far East, particularly using the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime corridor. And the fact that now with the rapprochement of sorts between India and China, that the ports along the way are also now available to us. So I would say those are the three areas where I expect to see something. There is also, some concern about India in terms of jobs and a possible mobility agreement as well.
Thank you, Suhasini. Before going to Alexei, a follow-up to something you just said. You mentioned the peace plan and Ukraine and all this. How much of an irritant is Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, in India-Russia relations?
I don't think it's an irritant at all. I think from the word go, New Delhi has been very clear, the Modi government has been very clear about its strategy. Now, what it says and what it does doesn't always have to be the same. It can express concerns without those concerns going forward. But I think the fact that right from the beginning, India has not ever issued a critical word about the invasion. And I should be honest, I'm amongst the commentators who have written that it should be possible to criticize Russia as a good friend without necessarily damaging the relationship for anything. But India, I think, has been very clear that that's not the way the government is going to go. So 25 votes at the UNGA, the UN Security Council, the IAEA, UNESCO, where India abstained from the vote. I think that's the first marker you have to watch closely. The second is India's genuine push to try and see peace, but not on one side's terms. So, for example, if you look at India's participation and refusal to sign on to the Swiss conference last year, it was very clear that India is willing to be part of peace processes, but not one that deprioritizes Moscow's concerns. And Prime Minister Modi traveling to Moscow last year, amidst all the concerns that European countries had evinced, and particularly what happened when he was there, I think made that case again. The third has been India's refusal so far to commit to unilateral sanctions, particularly on oil when it came to Russia. And whereas, as I said earlier, with Iran and Venezuela, India gave up the oil. But 3 years now, India has not given up. And so the idea that India stuck to what would be called Bandung principles of UN Charter being supreme, so until it's a UN sanction in a sense, non-interference and territorial sovereignty being important, I think India's consistently repeated that particular concern. The question is, will there be irritants now? I think there is, as Ambassador Mukherjee said, a language between the two sides that has accepted a way to overcome such difficulties. And, sometimes you only know the value of a friendship when it goes away. The period between 2014 and 2018, I think arguably, but those who watched it closely, was a period of real distance between Delhi and Moscow. If we have seen a reassertion now of strategic autonomy, not of multi-alignment, but multipolarity. Obviously not non-alignment, but if we've seen a reassertion of Indian strategic autonomy, it has been because this relationship has been tested against other geopolitical developments, whether it was Trump shock 1.0 or the more Trump shocks in his 2.0 term, whether it has been the COVID pandemic, whether it has been China's aggressions at the line of actual control and what followed from there, whether it has been the Israel-Gaza operations, which may have not changed bilateral ties, but certainly have completely derailed India's connectivity plans. Because of what emerged in the Middle East, India can no longer talk about IMEC, I2U2, even Chabahar and INSTC, frankly, are a casualty for the moment of the tensions in the region. Against all of those shocks that India has faced in the last 5 years, this is one relationship that has found a way.
Thank you. Alexei, well, I must tell all of you that Alexei is actually by specialization an Indologist. So he studies India, and therefore the question that I'm going to ask you is one that flows out of something that Suhasini said. There is a challenge in trade. You know, we went from 10 billion to 65 billion, and now if you take out that 40, 50 billion of oil, what is left is, whatever residual is left. How do you manage to amp up the trade to take it back to a significant level? Particularly given that, my view again, that I don't think the sanctions are going to go away very soon. Even if peace is achieved in Ukraine, the sanctions are not going to be lifted overnight. So enlighten us.
Thank you. It's a very pertinent question. I would like to start with the point that I think we have to acknowledge, as Suhasini just said, that trade volumes have reached its peak, and particularly with oil imports from India going down, I think that it's likely that we will not see the figures going up as it used to be over the past 2-3 years. And I think that before it's reflected in the statistics, the two governments are to make certain efforts to keep up afloat. And of course, the top priority here, as you say, is to ramp up India's exports somehow. I think it's been part of the effort over the last 2 years, but there are some difficulties on the way. Because I think that both Moscow and Delhi acknowledge the areas where actually India could have increased its shipments to Russia. I think that these are machinery equipment, telecom equipment, of course, food and pharmaceutical products. Part of the problem, at least something that the Indian government was referring to, is laced with tariff and non-tariff barriers. It's both being discussed now as part of the bilateral agenda, and also I think that negotiations started as part of India's talks with the Eurasian Economic Union. So if they manage to go ahead with some measures at the bilateral level, then it's likely that this can be scaled up at the level of India-EU agreement in the future. Of course, it will take some time. Of course, there are some other impediments as well. There is an obvious reluctance from Indian private businesses to enter into the Russian market against the backdrop of sanctions, even though now, India is also facing more concerns about sanctions and doesn't want to bow to US pressure. I think that for small Indian businesses, this issue is very sensitive and they are really vulnerable to any restrictions. That's why it remains to be seen if there is really an incentive an effort to incentivize them somehow to be more present in Russia. And on the positive side, I've told several issues that exist. On the positive side, I think that Russia and India managed to overcome certain difficulties in payments. I think that the ruble-rupee mechanism is working better than it was the case in the previous years. So I think that the largest amount of operations is now in national currencies, about 90%. So to my mind, it's something that can be that can facilitate future trade operations. But again, it remains to be seen what will be the announcements at this summit regarding the attempts to facilitate India's exports, because it's one of the issues that has to be addressed.
I want to ask a question which actually I want directed at both the ambassador as well as Suhasini. There is, in recent times, particularly after the Ukraine conflict started, there is this huge question about Russia's relationship with China, and it is obviously agitating the minds of a lot of Indian strategic thinkers, armchair or otherwise. So to you specifically, Ambassador Mukherjee, the question is, do you anticipate that Russia will continue supporting India on sensitive issues in the United Nations, let's say? Suppose something comes up on some issue that involves both Pakistan and China. What would be Russia's position? What is your anticipation? I know you can't predict, but...
It's difficult to predict any of these things, but based on events and things that have taken place, one can make an educated, give an educated answer. I think that if you look at the statement made by Foreign Minister Lavrov in September this year in the General Assembly, he came out, apart from all the other things on Ukraine and other things, he came out with a very clear statement of support for India's permanent membership of a reformed Security Council. Now, of course, the key in that is the word reformed Security Council, because so far Russia has not taken any initiative to propose any reform of the Security Council. So it could be, therefore, a kind of comfort statement for India's aspirations. But the fact that he singled out India and Brazil and no other country in this year's statement is, I think, a serious enough indicator, because Foreign Minister Lavrov does not make statements very lightly. He weighs every word that he says. Now, in terms of China, there are two events which have happened in the past few years which give an indicator of how things stand on the ground, and as far as Russia, China, India are concerned in the UN Security Council. The first was in 2019 when China tried to open up India's decision on Article 370 at the Security Council. And it is interesting that it was an informal meeting, it was not on the record, etc., but we have enough feedback from participants as well as from media. It's interesting to note that Russia did not support China's effort to reopen, to raise this Article 370 decision in the Security Council.
So, Asni, since you're the eminent journalist here, I can't resist asking, how much of a concern is Russia, China, and India's Foreign Office?
From what I understand of it, it isn't the concern that you hear outside of South Bloc, as in from the embassies, from diplomats, when you travel abroad, because of a simple thing. India's concerns about China are not that they will have to build a common front with others to deal with China. India has consistently, and this includes 2020, decided to deal with China on a bilateral basis. That means we will take care of them. Therefore, if you have decided that, and if you have decided that there is not going to be a larger confrontation, because after all, if there was a time to ask for help, it would have been 2020, in the middle of COVID, transgressions along the line of actual control, and yet the government decided not to do it. Then the need will always be for buffer zones, or I mean in the diplomatic sense, or of people who will provide a common ground, which is what Moscow provided. After all, the first meetings that happened between Indian and Chinese took place in Moscow on the sidelines, I think, of the BRICS or SEO foreign ministers meeting and SEO defense ministers meeting. So that's one. The second was a statement made by Dr. Jaishankar when he told Europeans at, I think, the Munich Security Forum or one of the other ones, that the need is to open more avenues for Russia. The need is not to say Russia should not deal with China. And I remember him saying open more doors for Russia at a time when that seemed like an impossible thing to ask European countries to agree to. So my own sense is the Russia-China relationship coming closer, particularly on security issues, will obviously be a concern because India does see China as one of India's biggest challenges, and through extension, its relationship with Pakistan is another big security challenge for India. But there has been a kind of unwritten conversation, and sometimes we hear it even being espoused, that neither side will do anything that harms the other's interest. So my sense is that's more or less, sometimes we'll hear, the Russian side is about to sell helicopters to Pakistan, and then, and those are, there is that kind of apprehension. But I don't think over time we have seen the relationship get less close because of Russia, China. And at the end of the day, the world has changed so much that now we are not looking at the India of the 2010s or the 2014s, or we are now looking at an India post-2020. And what our strategic choices will require to have more friendships, to have closer engagements with more countries than it will be to try and, in a sense, pushing the narrative of polarization between Russia, China on one side and US, Europe on the other is not of benefit to a country like India.
No, don't go away because I have a follow-up to that.
Could I just also follow up on, you asked Alexei the question of what can India possibly sell to Russia. We don't know yet because as Alexei pointed out, there needs to be a political will to sell some of this. But what we do know is where we are hurting. And we have now seen 3 months of US tariffs on India of 50%. Whether or not this is, something that is more widely spoken about, individually, anecdotally, exporters are hurting. I just spoke to somebody who did 80% of their exports to the US. They are now doing 18% because of 50% tariffs on Indian goods. Now, in these 3 months, 4 months, 5 months before a trade deal is put in place, before the US rolls back first the 25% Russia tariff, then rolls back perhaps 25% to about 15% on the reciprocal trade tariffs, you are going to see it very difficult for the orders that were originally there to be replaced immediately. Because in the meanwhile, importers in the US are beginning to find others. So even if you say that, jewelry exports have found a different route, or clothing exports are now doing third country export to the US. The truth is there is going to be an Indian surplus that is going to need new markets. And I would be surprised if all of it goes as we see it going. And if, for example, India decides not to completely zero out Russian oil and decides to actually brave American wrath over the issue. Because the truth is, India has braved the European statements. But it is only after the US began its tariffs, other than the sanctions on those 2 particular companies, that we've seen India having the debate about whether to give up Russian oil or not. If India decides to stick it out and stay with this, then it is going to have to look for new markets.
Before I move on to questions from the audience, Alexei, I want to ask you, we've discussed everything a lot about India, Russia and all, but one of the cornerstones of the India-Russia relationship, an Indo-Soviet relationship, has been defense cooperation. So where is that today? Where is defense cooperation between India and Russia today? Is there a future?
Well, indeed, it's one of the pillars, as we say, of the bilateral partnership. As Suhasini mentioned, I think that there is a lot of discussion in this topic. And it seems that bilateral partnership is back on track because, Russia managed to deliver some systems that were there, in the pipeline for several years. I refer to the stealth frigates that were delivered this year and last year. We can also see Russia trying to deliver the S-400 as per the agreement of 2018. I think there is discussion of a new deal on this particular platform. I think there is more interest in India towards Russian air defense system in general, not only S-400, but just S-400 are being part of discussion everywhere, but there were MOUs on other systems as well, like Panzer system, which can be efficient to fight against aerial targets. So the bottom line here is that we don't know much about this partnership. Is that after 2017, when the United States introduced countering America's adversaries sanctions, CAATSA legislation, I think that this track of partnership has become more obscure. And particularly after Ukraine, there is less and less information about where this bilateral cooperation is headed. But at least judging by the press releases and media reports, we can say that there are more meetings between defense officials. There are more MOUs being signed. But what will be the practical outcomes remains to be seen. If we ever know all the details, is also not so sure.
As someone who's, I'm going to let out a state secret here. Ambassador Mukherjee dealt with this subject of India-Russia defense for a period of time, and at a fairly sensitive period of time, I would say. So, any comments to make on this?
Yeah, well, two comments. One is that, I sometimes get very agitated reading about this phrase called legacy systems. People are advising India to get rid of legacy defense equipment from Russia and former Soviet Union. Well, the MiG-21 was a legacy system, and I think we have put it now to bed. But the systems that we got now, which were put into the pipeline when I was in Moscow in 2001, 2, 3, 4, they have stood the test of time. The Sukhoi 30s came because of that. The stealth frigates that he mentioned, all of them came. They were deployed in this common international effort against piracy of the East in the African coast up to India. So the stealth frigates stood the test of time. The BrahMos has stood the test of time. And behind it is one factor which I think is being talked about by our defense minister especially, which is that the new phase of the defense relationship is moving from off-the-shelf purchase to joint production, including the transfer of technologies to Indian enterprises. And the first one that's come on stream is in Amethi, the AK-203 rifle project. That is already on stream. And there are more that are being discussed. Now, what will come out, as everybody says on this panel, we do not know. But the key point is that this is a foreign partner which is willing to transfer technologies, which is not the case with the other major strategic partners with whom we have defense relationships. So that is a key point. And that feeds into the Atmanirbhar Bharat project or platform in India, which includes technology investments and, most important for any government, employment generation.
So let's give this panel a hand. I think they've done an excellent job. Thank you very much. You've been a very interesting and engaging audience. Thank you.